Across the entire world, 163 countries, terrorism deaths dropped last year by 28%, the lowest figures since 2007. Countries are getting safer. The global trend is going down. Nigeria went up by 46%. 750 people killed in 2025 alone. And here's the part nobody is asking. While every other country in the Sahel was improving, Burkina Faso down 45%, Mali down, Nigeria was the only country in the region to record increases in both the number of attacks and the number of deaths. The whole world got safer. Nigeria got worse. So the question is, why? Is this a security failure? Is it a political calculation? Or is something bigger going on that Abuja doesn't want you to focus on? Stay with me, because by the time we're done, you're going to see this situation very differently. Before we go deeper, if you are just finding Naijanewsfeed, welcome. This channel exists to break down what's really happening in Nigerian politics without the noise, without the spin. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because this one gets interesting. So what exactly happened, and why is this report landing like a bombshell today? The 2026 Global Terrorism Index, published by the Institute for Economics and Peace, one of the most credible research bodies in the world, was released this week. It ranks 163 countries based on terrorism deaths, number of attacks, injuries, and hostage situations. It's not a political document, it's a data document, and the data on Nigeria is alarming. Here's the headline. Nigeria jumped to 4th place in the world. In 2024, Nigeria was ranked 8th. In 1 year, Nigeria moved up 4 spots, not because other countries got worse, but because Nigeria got significantly worse while others improved. 750 people died from terrorism on Nigerian soil in 2025. That's up from 513 the year before, an increase of 237 deaths in a single year, the largest single-year increase of any country on earth. 2 of the 20 most deadly terrorist attacks in the entire world in 2025 happened in Borno State. The first, May 15, 2025, jihadists attacked the villages of Malam Karamti and Kwatandashi in Kukawa local government. About 100 civilians were rounded up, taken into the forest. 57 bodies were later recovered. 70 people are still missing. The second, September 5, 2025, gunmen attacked the village of Dara Jamal in Bama local government. 58 villagers and 5 soldiers were killed. Think about those numbers. 100 people rounded up, 57 confirmed dead, 70 still unaccounted for, months later. And 80% of all terrorism deaths in Nigeria were carried out by just 2 groups, ISWAP and Boko Haram. That's the situation. Now, let's understand the structure behind it, because that's where the real story lives. Here's the part the government doesn't want trending. Nigeria is now the only country in the entire Sahel that got worse in every single category. Not 2, not 1, every category. Now, who is supposed to be handling this, and what tools do they actually have? At the federal level, Nigeria's counter-terrorism architecture involves the Nigerian Army, the Department of State Services, the Office of the National Security Advisor, and the State Security Service. The legal backbone is the Terrorism Prevention Act, first passed in 2011 and amended multiple times. It gives security agencies wide powers, designation of terrorist groups, asset freezing, prosecution frameworks, and intelligence gathering. On paper, this is a serious apparatus. The Nigerian military has been deployed, listen to this, in 2/3 of Nigeria's 36 states. 2/3. That's not a targeted counter-terrorism operation. That's a country stretched to its limits. The supercamp strategy was the military's flagship approach since 2019, consolidating troops into fortified hubs in population centers. The theory was sound: protect the towns, dominate the logistics lines, and starve out the insurgents. But here's what the analysts are now saying. Those super camps have become strategic liabilities. ISWAP figured out how to isolate them, blow up the roads and bridges surrounding the camps, cut off their supply lines, then attack at night. The camps are underfunded, Some are poorly fortified, and corruption in the supply chain means soldiers on the front lines often don't have what they need. So, if the military strategy has collapsed, who's benefiting from the fact that it's not being reformed? That's the political strategy layer, and that's exactly where we're going next.
This is the core of everything. Strip away the military language and the press releases and ask the most important question in Nigerian politics: who benefits? Let's start with the most uncomfortable fact. Nigeria has been fighting Boko Haram and its offshoots since 2009, over 15 years. In that time, tens of thousands of Nigerians have been killed. Over 2 million people have been displaced, and yet the insurgency has not been defeated. It hasn't even been contained. It has expanded. A Council on Foreign Relations analysis puts it plainly. The confluence of corruption, bad strategy, and a global counter-insurgency industry has created what they call a path dependency. In plain English, there are people who profit from this war continuing: defense contracts, intelligence budgets, foreign military assistance. When you are receiving billions in security funding, ending the war is not always in your financial interest. Now, let's talk about political geography. Borno State accounts for 67% of all terrorism attacks in Nigeria and 72% of all terrorism deaths. This is the Northeast. It has been the epicenter for over a decade. Yet, the political elite in Abuja, largely operating from the Southwest and North Central, are insulated from the daily reality of what that means on the ground. The ADC opposition party came out this week and pointed out something worth examining. Under the Tinubu administration, terror attacks rose from 120 incidents in 2024 to 171 in 2025, a 43% rise in the number of incidents. They also noted that civilians now make up 67% of those killed. Now, Abuja's defenders will say insecurity is structural and predates any one administration. That's partially true, but here's the political pressure point that matters. What has the response looked like? The same CFR analysis notes that the government has spent a disproportionate share of its counter-terrorism resources on air power, fighter jets and attack aircraft in a conflict where the enemy moves on foot through rural terrain embedded among civilians. The result: multiple documented cases of Nigerian military airstrikes killing internally displaced persons and aid workers instead of militants. Meanwhile, at the regional level, something critical has gone largely unreported. Niger, Nigeria's neighbor, pulled out of the multinational Joint Task Force in March 2025 following its military coup. That MNJTF is the regional coalition responsible for cross-border counter-terrorism in the Lake Chad Basin. Niger's exit has created an operational vacuum along the Nigeria-Niger border, and ISWAP has been moving into that vacuum with foreign fighters and drone technology, drone surveillance and armed drones, suggesting significant funding from ISIS Central Command. Who are the silent players? There are foreign interests here that don't get discussed openly. The United States recently confirmed a small military contingent is now assisting Nigeria with intelligence gathering and training in Lagos. That presence is notable. It signals that Washington sees Nigeria's trajectory as a strategic concern, not just a humanitarian one. The question worth sitting with is this: with all the resources, all the legislation, all the foreign partners, why is Nigeria alone in the Sahel getting worse? That's not a coincidence. That's a system producing a result someone is either failing to change or quietly allowing to continue. And there's one misconception dominating Nigerian social media right now that completely distorts how people are reading this report. We'll come back to that. Now, if what I just laid out surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know your take before we get to the part that changes the whole picture. Let's zoom out and talk about what this means for Nigeria as a whole, not just Borno State. The first implication is economic. Insecurity is not just a security problem, it is an investment problem. When Nigeria appears on a Global Terrorism Index at number 4, that's a headline that reaches boardrooms in London, New York, and Singapore. It reinforces risk premiums, it drives up borrowing costs, it tells international businesses to look elsewhere. The Northeast has fertile land. The Lake Chad Basin was one of the most productive agricultural zones in West Africa. Today, it is largely inaccessible. Communities that should be farming and trading are displaced, dependent on humanitarian aid that itself comes under attack. The second implication, the security spread. This is not contained to the Northeast. Bandits are operating in the Northwest. Farmer-herder violence is ongoing in Benue and Plateau states. Separatist-linked violence continues in the Southeast. The GTI report noted that Nigeria's armed forces are deployed across 2/3 of states. No army in the world is effective when stretched that thin. The third implication is social. There is a real risk of further ethnic and religious polarization. The communities being attacked are predominantly Muslim farming communities in the Northeast. The security forces are predominantly from across Nigeria. The insurgent groups use religious framing. This creates a combustible environment where legitimate grievances, poverty, neglect, lack of state presence can be channeled into radicalization. The GTI report flagged that youth radicalization investigations have tripled globally since 2021. Nigeria is not immune to that trend. Here's the data point that should stop you. The GTI says 76% of all terrorist attacks globally in 2025 happened within 100 kilometers of an international border. For Nigeria, that border exposure spans Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, and 2 of those 3 now have juntas that have reduced or ended military cooperation with Abuja.
There is a significant international dimension to this story that most Nigerian coverage is missing. Start with the Sahel collapse. Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, 3 of Nigeria's regional neighbors, are all now under military governments. All 3 have expelled or reduced ties with Western military partners. France's Operation Barkhane, which spent nearly a decade fighting jihadists in the Sahel, ended in 2022. The G5 Sahel Joint Force, the regional military coalition, has effectively collapsed. This has removed critical intelligence sharing and joint operation frameworks that Nigeria relied on. Niger's withdrawal from the Multinational Joint Task Force in March 2025 is particularly damaging. That force operated across the Lake Chad Basin, specifically targeting the island strongholds that ISWAP uses as logistics hubs and staging grounds. Without Niger's cooperation, the northern flank of that operation is compromised. Then there's the IS global pivot. The GTI report documents a dramatic strategic shift by Islamic State. In the Middle East and North Africa, IS attacks dropped by 39%. In sub-Saharan Africa, IS attacks nearly doubled, rising from 111 to 221 incidents. Islamic State is consciously redeploying resources and fighters toward Africa. ISWAP is the primary vehicle for that expansion in West Africa, and Nigeria is ground zero. For Nigerians in the diaspora, particularly in the UK and US, this matters for how your government views the homeland. The US military presence in Lagos is significant. It tells you that Washington is treating Nigeria as a frontline security concern, not just a development partner. That creates both opportunities and risks. Opportunities for intelligence cooperation and training, risks of mission creep, and the political complications that come with foreign military footprints. The broader pattern. The epicenter of terrorism has officially shifted from the Middle East to the Sahel. That's not media language. That's the IEP's own language in the 2026 report. And Nigeria sits at the eastern edge of that epicenter, sharing borders with some of the most unstable states on the continent.
Let me now address the narratives circulating that don't hold up under scrutiny. Misconception 1. This is a northern Muslim problem. It doesn't affect the rest of Nigeria. This is factually wrong and strategically dangerous. The economic consequences of sustained insecurity in the northeast, lost agricultural output, displaced populations, infrastructure destruction, diverted security budgets, affect every Nigerian taxpayer. The investor perception of Nigeria as a whole is shaped by this index. When a CEO in Frankfurt reads Nigeria 4th in Global Terrorism Index, they don't think Borno State only, they think Nigeria. Insecurity anywhere creates risk everywhere. Misconception 2. The military is winning. The government has it under control. The data says otherwise. 750 deaths, 171 attacks in 2025 alone, 2 of the world's deadliest 20 attacks happening on Nigerian soil, ISWAP launching at least 12 coordinated attacks on military bases in Borno in a 3-month period. These are not the metrics of a conflict being won. The supercamp strategy, the military's flagship approach, has been exposed and ISWAP has adapted to defeat it. What hasn't changed is the strategy. Misconception 3. This is a purely Tinubu problem. Blame the current administration. This is where the politics can cloud the analysis. The insurgency predates Tinubu, it predates Buhari, it has structural roots in decades of underdevelopment, poverty, and neglect of the Northeast. The 15-year failure to resolve this is a systemic failure of the Nigerian state across multiple administrations, multiple parties, multiple chiefs of army staff. That said, the responsibility for the response today belongs to whoever holds executive power, and the data for the current period is bad and getting worse. Accountability and structural analysis are not mutually exclusive. Here's the thing people are sleeping on. Burkina Faso, which was the most terrorism-affected country in the world for 2 consecutive years, dropped 45% in a single year. Mali dropped, Niger dropped, the Sahel overall improved. Nigeria is swimming against the tide. That doesn't happen by accident.
Let me tell you what to watch for, because how this plays out over the next 12 to 18 months will tell you a lot about Nigeria's trajectory. Watch 1. Does the supercamp strategy get formally reviewed? Military analysts have been explicit. The supercamp model has been compromised by ISWAP's tactics. If Abuja quietly acknowledges this and shifts to more mobile, community-embedded, intelligence-driven operations, that's a meaningful signal. If the strategy doesn't change, expect the numbers to get worse. Watch 2. What happens with the multinational joint task force? Niger's exit has left a critical gap. If Nigeria can rebuild that regional cooperation, possibly drawing in Chad and Cameroon more directly, there's a path to restoring cross-border pressure on ISWAP. If those diplomatic efforts stall, ISWAP will continue using the border zones as safe corridors. Watch 3. Does the political class treat this as an election liability? The 2027 general elections are approaching. If opposition parties successfully link the terrorism surge to governance failures in a way that resonates with voters beyond the Northeast, this becomes a national political issue. Watch for whether candidates from the South begin making Borno a campaign issue. That would signal a shift in how Nigeria's political class is calculating the cost of continued failure. Best-case scenario, Abuja overhauls its counter-terrorism strategy, prioritizes intelligence and community protection over air power, rebuilds regional military cooperation, and channels development resources into the Northeast to address the conditions that feed recruitment. Deaths fall sharply, the way they did in Burkina Faso this year. Worst-case scenario, the strategy doesn't change. ISWAP, now equipped with drones and foreign fighters, continues its territorial consolidation in Borno.
The insurgency spreads further west toward Adamawa, possibly Gombe. Investor confidence erodes further. Internal displacement increases, and by 2027, Nigeria moves from 4th to 3rd on the GTI. Long term, if nothing changes, Nigeria risks becoming what experts are calling a failed security state in slow motion. A country that holds elections, passes budgets, and makes speeches, while entire regions effectively operate outside state control. That has consequences not just for the Northeast, but for the legitimacy of the Nigerian project itself. Let's come back to where we started. The whole world got safer from terrorism in 2025, the lowest death toll since 2007, and Nigeria got worse, the largest increase of any country on earth. Here's the honest answer to the question I raised at the top. This is not primarily a military problem. It is a governance problem wearing a military uniform. The Northeast has been underdeveloped, underfunded, and politically underrepresented for decades. Boko Haram didn't emerge from nowhere. It emerged from that vacuum. And as long as the conditions that created it remain unchanged, no amount of airstrikes will resolve it. The 750 people who died in Nigeria last year from terrorism were not statistics. They were farmers, soldiers, villagers who were rounded up in their own communities. The 70 people from Kukawa who are still missing as of the writing of this report, someone's parent, child, or sibling, deserve better than another press conference. Nigeria has the capacity to turn this around, but that requires the political will to treat this as a national emergency it actually is, not as a regional problem for the Northeast to manage quietly. That's my read. Now I want yours. Drop it in the comments. Do you think this is a governance failure, a military strategy failure, or something deeper? Let's have that conversation. If this breakdown gave you clarity on what's really going on, do me a favor. Share it with one person who needs to understand this. Like the video, subscribe to Nigernewsfeed, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp.